Hey, welcome back to the Conservative Cat Show, the place where we sift through history, truth, politics, faith, and the madness of modern ideology with a sharp mind and a biblical compass. This is the place. It's the Conservative Cat Show. Subscribe to the channel. Today, we're doing something a little special for today's episode. It's a little different, something a little heavy. We are stepping back into the 19th century and we are examining a man and his ideas, and how his ideas shaped revolutions, toppled nations, murdered millions, and continues to seep into the cracks of American culture like a poisonous fog. We are talking about Karl Marx today. Now, you might have heard that name your whole life. Karl Marx has been called a visionary. Karl Marx is praised on college campuses by professors. I lived it at Illinois State University. But this is a guy who thought he could redesign civilization. But to be honest with you, he couldn't even keep his own life on track. He is praised by professors who probably can't keep their lives on track either, probably can't change a tire, isn't amongst the working class. But they think they all know how to redesign civilization and society. And maybe you see young people wear his face on a t-shirt. They conveniently leave out the fact that his face was covered in these disgusting boils because he refused to shower. But kids wear his face on t-shirts around college campuses like he's some sort of rock star. And they're completely oblivious, these college students, that, hey, being a part of the fan club means that you have to be all in for the millions of people murdered as a result of his ideology. And, you know, his fan club, being a part of this fan club, the Karl Marx fan club, you have to be all about the death toll as well. So today we are not reading a revisionist history textbook. No. We're not reading through a sanitized textbook. We are diving into the real story, the man behind the ideology, the man who preached revolution, while at the same time refused to work and take care of his family. And he wrote about the dignity of work and labor, all while living off of somebody else's paycheck. Okay, the guy's personal life was a complete dumpster fire. We're even getting into it. But yet he's believed to be the engineer of a utopia. And he thought he could be the engineer of a utopia for everyone else, although his own life was a complete dumpster fire. So we are going to take a journey through his childhood, his adult failures. We're going to take a look at the writing of the Communist Manifesto, the birth of Marxism, the differences between Marxism and communism, and how it transformed. Marxism transformed into communism. And I want to talk about the really catastrophic impact on nations across the world. And yes, we are going to talk about how Marxism contradicts Christianity, liberty, human dignity, and reality. So reality itself. So settle in. This is a long form lesson. It's kind of like a documentary, kind of like part conservative cat commentary. It's 100% truth, though. I did my research on Karl Marx, and this is one of those episodes where I say, hey, archive it, share it with your kids at the dinner table. This is not revisionist history that is currently taught in K through 12 schools and in higher education. So let me start in Germany. The year is 1818. Cobblestone streets, horse-drawn carriages, the rise of industrialization humming in the distance. And there's this little city called Trier, right? This is a wealthy, middle-class family. They welcomed a little baby boy, and they named him Karl Marx. His father, Heinrich Marx, was a lawyer, a respected lawyer, and his mother, Henriette, okay, came from a very comfortable lifestyle, a Dutch Jewish family, and they were not struggling. Okay, Karl Marx's family did not struggle. They were not oppressed. They were not downtrodden workers. Okay, uh, suffering and misery. Okay, they were solid, stable, and prosperous. And he was a lawyer, middle class. Some would argue upper middle class. Okay, yeah. Ironically, Karl Marx, he spent most of his life writing about how his parents were villains and how people like his parents were villains, um, and were the villains of history. So young Karl, he was brilliant. Okay, no doubt. He absorbed books like oxygen. Okay, and while he was reading, he kind of developed a sense, or really developed something pretty quickly. And a lot of his teachers described him as arrogant. He developed an ego, a huge, huge ego. And his classmates actually remember him, and this is all primary documents, right, as combative, condescending, dismissive, and that he was kind of known for a temper and a sense of superiority. He had a big ego. Teachers described him as arrogant. He wasn't really a tortured soul. He wasn't a victim. He wasn't oppressed. He was just a spoiled brat who had a big ego and came from a wealthy family. And he thought that the world owed him something. That's Karl Marx. Okay. And this alone explains the Marxist ideology. Who he was as a person really explains a good portion of the Marxist ideology. So Marx, he eventually left the little city of Trier, this middle-class city, and he went to go study at the University of Bonn. Okay, and while other students were attending lectures, Karl Marx, he actually went out and joined a drinking club. It was called the Tavern Club. And he got into fights, he ran up debts, he even challenged another student to a duel. At the time in the 1800s. You could do that. Yes, a duel. This guy who, would preach by day collectivism and disdain for personal violence and self-defense. He was out there waving swords like he was auditioning for the Pirates of the Caribbean movie. So he challenged another student to a duel. There were several scandals while he was in college. After one too many scandals, his father actually yanked him from the university and sent him to the University of Berlin. Well, that didn't help. Karl Marx, he started reading radical philosophy there, attacking his professors, arguing with pretty much anybody. He became obsessed with tearing down a world that he actually forgot to build his own life up. He became obsessed with tearing down a society, a world, and then he forgot to build up his own life. And that's kind of the theme of Karl Marx's entire existence. He wanted to demolish every system, every institution, every structure, except the ones he personally depended on, right? So it's very hypocritical, and we're going to see more of that as we look into his personal life a little bit deeper here. In Berlin, Karl Marx actually plunged into this philosophical rebellion. He plunged into this world, and he devoured the readings of Hegel, Feuerbach, and some other really thinkers. Not doers, okay, but they thought a lot about religion, how much they questioned it and hated it. They thought a lot about morality and tradition, hated morality and tradition. A lot of these, writings from these people he was studying, and he wasn't simply reading and educating himself. He was absorbing, and he became very resentful, bitter, and had a sense that society itself was fundamentally broken. So really he was brainwashed by some of these other, philosophers. But despite his big dreams and bigger opinions, he couldn't hold down a job. Okay. He really attempted at journalism, but his editors always would fire, like quickly realized while he was on the job that he would turn like every single article into a rant against society. And that didn't make for good journalism, right? So the employers discovered something pretty profound about Marx, that he was good at criticizing work rather than doing it. So he eventually got married, shockingly. Jenny von Westphalen. Okay, Westphalen. Jenny. She was a woman, really a wealthy woman, baroness. Okay, and she was a woman who gave up her wealth, her status, and she believed in Karl Marx and all of his brilliance. I'm going to take a drink of water. Hold on. She believed this guy and believed in his brilliance, so much so that she moved in with him and left her wealthy status. So she supported him. She followed him into exile. She stayed loyal as they moved from Germany to Paris to Belgium to London. All while Karl Marx did nothing. He didn't work a day in his life. Could not hold down a job. All he did was produce endless manuscripts and endless excuses as to why you couldn't go get a job. So they eventually him and Jenny ended up in London. By the end of it, he was exiled really from his hometown, from Trier, from the universities, because he was just embroiled in scandal after scandal, challenging people to duels, drinking. So eventually, they moved from Germany to Paris, and then to Belgium to London. So they wound up in London, and they wound up in this little tiny apartment, all documented, filthy, infested, and they were perpetually behind on rent. Karl Marx, his children lacked food, proper food and care. 3 of them actually died as a result, died very young. Tragedies that weighed very heavily on the wife, Jenny. But Marx, he simply just kept writing about a revolution that would cure society of all of its suffering. And, his kids are dying while he's doing that. And he's not providing food for them or medical care. And they wound up dying very young. So Marx, he had a best friend. His name was Friedrich Engels. Now, this guy was the son of a very wealthy factory owner. And what this guy did, Friedrich, he paid Karl Marx's rent. All documented. He bought his groceries for him, and he kept the family afloat. Think about that. The irony here. The guy who preached about the destruction of capitalism, and he was literally alive because of a capitalist charity here. Okay, he was the son of a wealthy factory owner. He owned a factory with workers, and he was the son of the owner. So Karl Marx living on capitalism, okay, capitalist charity. So let me step in here for a moment with some conservative cat commentary, if you'll let me, please. The entire ideology depends on someone else paying your bills. Maybe, just maybe, if this entire ideology is based on that, maybe that is not the golden path to utopia. Okay, when your entire ideology depends on someone else paying your bills, it's not the golden path to utopia. Marx, he wrote passionately about the working class, although he never lived among them. He never worked. He didn't interact with the working class. He didn't understand them. He wrote manuscript after manuscript in a leather chair a smoke-filled room, library, because he was a smoker as well. And he waited for his boy, Frederick's, the Engels guy, his best friend, to send him another check to keep his family afloat. Okay. This is the root of Marxism, an ideology designed by someone who never lived the life he romanticized. Okay, working and the labor and all of that. He never lived amongst the working class. His place looked like a storage unit that lost a fight with a raccoon. It was clothes everywhere, children barefoot. The papers were stacked up like Jenga towers. Okay, the furniture was falling apart, and this philosopher was drowning in chaos, a chaos of his own making, by the way. And in the middle of all of it was Jenny, his long-suffering wife. Jenny, she, like I said, was very comfortable in her life prior to marrying Karl Marx. She was a noble woman by birth. She could have easily married into prestige, wealth, or she could have easily married somebody who at least bathed regularly, and we'll get to that here in a second. But Jenny married Karl Marx, okay? And this guy was so allergic to work and responsibility, and he asked his best friend to pay for his family. And it wasn't even really his best friend. It was his best friend's daddy who owned a factory. So, history paints Karl Marx as this like revolutionary. In reality, his marriage was falling apart. Jenny hated the guy. Okay. She was not a revolutionary partner. Jenny wrote in letters, and this is documented, about the poverty, about the shame, about the debt collectors knocking at their door. And she begged Karl to find employment, whether that was a clerkship, a translation job, a newspaper position, literally anything, but Karl refused. And this is just so ironic. The father of Marxism, the champion of the laborer, right? The laborer hated labor with a fiery passion. And, Jenny, she loved him, but definitely after the death of her children, her 3 young children, she wrote in letters talking about how she pawned off her jewelry, talking about how she sold off family heirlooms, borrowed money from friends, stretched pennies, and she hated it. She watched helplessly as they buried multiple children. And because they didn't have enough money, they had to bury their children in unmarked graves at the time as well. Something that weighed very heavy on her. And amidst all of this, it gets worse, because the Marx family, and this is where Jenny really started to hold anger and resentment in her heart towards Karl Marx. The Marx family, they actually had a servant girl. Now, I will tell you this. This isn't as documented, or there aren't as many primary documents about this, but it's believed, widely believed, that Helene Demuth, she was the servant girl of the Marx family, paid for, obviously, by the friend of the factory owner's friend. Okay, she went there, and rumors of this era, and I think that they could possibly be true. She actually became the mother of Karl Marx's illegitimate son. Jenny was devastated by this, humiliated, betrayed, and Marx, the champion of the oppressed, refused to publicly acknowledge the child after the illegitimate child was born, and he passed the duty of raising that child onto who? His best friend, Friedrich Engels, who stepped forward and pretended that the child was his. Why do you think the best friend did this? Because they were protecting the revolution, of course. because nothing says workers of the world unite like letting your wealthy friend take responsibility for your moral failures. Okay. This is scandalous, and Jenny really never forgave Karl for it. In their letters, their diaries, you can see that their marriage was stretched thin. And it was stretched thin really by the man who behaved like a prophet in public, but like a spoiled little brat in private. Now I want to talk about the painful boils on Karl Marx's backside, his thighs, and lower back for years. These were like blemishes, and they weren't like little blemishes, okay? These were massive infected boils that made sitting for long hours impossible for Karl Marx. Doctors recorded this. Karl Marx wrote about them himself. He complained. He actually called it, quote, unceasing torture. They oozed, they burst, they would return, they multiplied. These physical manifestations of a man living in filth, stress, and poor hygiene. And you might say, Kat, why does all this really matter? You're talking a lot about who Karl Marx is, because Karl Marx's boils are really a metaphor to his entire life. He was a man who declared he could fix the entire world, but his own body was literally revolting against him. This is a guy who promised a perfect society, yet he couldn't keep his home clean and his wife happy. Okay, this is a guy who designed a flawless economic system, yet couldn't support his family. This is a guy who wrote about the dignity of labor, yet refused to do any actual labor himself. So this guy's ideas infected nations and killed millions of people, which we will get to here in just a second. Infected nations, just like his body was infected with these sores that would never heal. And Marx's boils are the perfect symbol of Marxism itself. Painful, self-inflicted, and impossible to get rid of once they take hold. Okay, so even as doctors hinted that the boils would be worsened by Marx's stress, rage, chain smoking, his lifestyle choices. In other words, he created his own misery. The doctors were clear about that. And just like the nations that adopted this ideology, they are creators of their own misery and of their country's own misery. So Jenny, exhausted by poverty and illness and humiliation, once wrote that her husband's constant complaints were nearly as unbearable as the boil themselves. So I thought that was a little funny tidbit. She hated listening to him complain. And in the final years of their marriage, Karl Marx, the man revolutionaries treat like a secular saint, really was just a bitter, frustrated, sickly man sitting on cushions because he was covered in sores head to toe. And he'd snap at his wife, and he'd rant about a world he couldn't control. And this is how history should remember him. His household family, like his members of his family, and he had 3 children die due to malnutrition and sickness. His household remembers him as a burden. Jenny remembers him as a burden. So let's get to 1848. Sorry, excuse me. And it was simmering with unrest in Europe. Okay, 1848, there was unrest, and it was just simmering. Revolutions, they started to burst out like firecrackers. Okay, and sensing the moment, Marx and his buddy Engels, they wrote something called the Communist Manifesto. So this isn't really long, the Communist Manifesto. It's well organized, but it was very powerful, and it's like a little pamphlet almost. And it was powerful because it promised paradise without cost, equality without effort, and justice through rage. And you could imagine the effect that the Communist Manifesto had on a very unrestful Europe in 1848. Okay, so Karl Marx argued that history was nothing but a conflict between two groups, the oppressed and the oppressors, the owners and the workers, the bourgeoisie and the proletariats. Okay, that's the terminology they used back in the time. The bourgeoisie, and the proletariats. Okay, he believed society was doomed to collapse under its own inequality, and that a violent revolution could reset the world. Okay, so just imagine Marx sitting in his cramped little London apartment, broke and lecturing the world about economics, the economics he's never practiced, by the way, because he's never worked a day in his life. Remember that. He claimed that private property was the source of all suffering. Yet he never gave up his own possessions. He claimed families were oppressive, yet depended on his wife to keep their household from completely collapsing. And he claimed that religion yet was a lie, yet he didn't offer any kind of spiritual alternative except obedience to the state. That is what he wanted. You couldn't be religious or you couldn't have a God because that would interfere with your obedience to the state. So the manifesto hit Europe in 1848 and it spread like wildfire. It became the rallying cry of these revolutionaries there. Students, activists, political movements all over the world. And yet here's the irony. Marx himself was so abrasive, so unlikable, so controlling that the very socialist groups he would try to join would keep kicking him out. They said that he insulted them and everyone. He demeaned his allies, monopolized leadership, and treated collaborators like enemies. So Karl Marx couldn't even run a club. Okay. But he believed that he could rewrite civilization, run civilization with his ideology. Okay. So let's step away from Marx the man and look at Marx the thinker, the architect of this worldview that would shape the 20th century. So Marx began here with a simple belief that human beings are defined by their relationship to the economy. Okay, not by their soul, not by their identity as children of God, not by their family, their individuality, or their free will, just their economics. And that is the first catastrophic mistake, because Christianity, you and I were Christians, teaches that the ultimate struggle is spiritual, a battle between good and evil, truth and falsehood, righteousness and sin. But Marx rejected God entirely, and he replaced him with the state, with the collective, with the human-designed utopia, So Karl Marx, he didn't believe just that religion was wrong. Okay, he thought it was dangerous, and he actually went as far as to, quote, call it the opium of the people, claiming that faith numbed the masses and prevented them from revolution, right? He believes that you got to have this big revolution to reset the world. And he wanted to liberate mankind, not from sin, but from God himself. So let me pause there a moment. Any ideology that begins with declaring war on God is guaranteed to end in bloodshed. Okay, any ideology that gives the big finger to God is going to end in bloodshed, and it's going to end badly. Okay. Karl Marx also believed that families were breeding grounds for inequality because parents would pass on wealth, values, and property to children. And he argued that the traditional family structure needed to fade away. He believed individuals were irrelevant and that only the collective mattered. Not the family. Your rights didn't matter. Your identity didn't matter. And the state was going to speak for everybody. Okay, the government. Now, this wasn't just economics. This was a new religion. Okay, a godless religion. Okay, so he envisioned a future where the government would control things like education, industry, communication, transportation, and even human relationships. He believed that once capitalism died, after this big old revolution he wanted, human nature would magically improve, and greed would vanish, conflict would disappear, and everyone would share everything peacefully. Now, I mean, if you've lived more than 5 minutes, okay, you know that's not how human beings function. But Karl Marx didn't care. He wasn't describing humanity as it is. He was describing humanity as he wished it would be. And the world ultimately is going to pay the price. I'm going to take a quick break, smash that like button, share this out with your friends. You're listening to Conservative Cat. Hey, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We are doing something a little special today here at the Conservative Cat Show. We are talking about Marxism, the ideology. Now I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about Marxism and the differences between Marxism and communism. Okay, there's not a huge difference, but I'll explain because I think people get a little confused. Communism is the political machine that tried to make Marx's dream come true, Karl Marx's dream. Now, I'm going to start with the story of the Bolsheviks, okay, because it doesn't begin with Lenin, okay, Vladimir, I think it's Lenin. Let me double check on the first name. Yeah, Vladimir Lenin. It doesn't start with him standing on a balcony proclaiming victory. It begins years earlier with restless Russia and a failing monarchy and a small group of radicals obsessed with Karl Marx. So I'm going to dig into the Bolsheviks a little bit and who they are, because you'll see how this is communism. This is like the political machine. Marxism is the ideology. Communism is the political machine that tries to make Karl Marx's dream a reality. Okay, so Russia at the turn of the 20th century was a pressure cooker. Okay, the Romanov dynasty had ruled for centuries. Okay, but their power was slipping. The country was massive, diverse, and really hard to govern, and poverty was widespread. The world was modernizing, but Russia here was not. They were still kind of stuck in their medieval ways. This was a dynasty of Russia really until, I mean, this is a long time, from 1613, from 1917, and it was toppled by the Bolsheviks, okay, in this revolution ultimately, okay. But it wasn't doing well under the Romanov dynasty, okay, because they were stuck in their medieval ways and they weren't really modernizing, okay. And into that environment in stepped these guys who read Karl Marx, not as theory, but as scripture, and really took Marxism for what it was, which was a godless religion. And these people called themselves the Bolsheviks, meaning the majority, though they were anything but. They were not the majority in Russia at the time. Led by Vladimir Lenin, this guy, as cold as the Siberia his enemies would later be exiled to, the Bolsheviks believed they could force Karl Marx's utopia into existence. Okay, they were ruthless, they were disciplined, And they were convinced that the ends justified the means, and justified any means, no matter how bloody those means were. So when World War I drained Russia's resources, men, food, stability, the Bolsheviks saw an opportunity. Okay. And the Tsar was ousted. So a Tsar is an emperor. Okay. He was ousted. And that happened in 1917, somewhere around there. And a temporary democratic government was formed. And Lenin, being the cold guy that he was, said, not fast enough. It's not the government I want. So they stormed government buildings, Petrograd, which is the city, which I think now has been renamed St. Petersburg, which is a port city on the Baltic Sea. So they stormed that, and then they seized government buildings, and they cut communication lines, and declared themselves the rulers of the Russian people. So, this was a really tough time. The Tsar was ousted, and there was supposed to be a government formed, but sorry, Lenin got there first. Vladimir Lenin. So taking power was really easy. That was the easy part. Now, keeping it required terror. Okay. Now, the Bolsheviks, what they did, they dismantled religion. They outlawed opposition parties. They confiscated people's land, and they executed anybody who they deemed counter-revolutionary. So they executed priests, they executed nobles, they executed farmers, they executed people for hoarding bread during a famine. And this famine was really created by them, and I'll get to that here in just a second of how they created this famine. But churches really became warehouses during this time. Monasteries became prisons, schools became indoctrination centers. So, in true Marxist fashion, what they did with the collective farming. Okay, they collectivized farms, and this is how they started the famine. And it really resulted in mass starvation. They did collectivized farms. Millions died as food was seized. So collectivized farms, they forced people into farming, and they would collect and then redistribute. Okay, millions died because guess what? The Bolsheviks just hoarded it from the wealthy, just hoarded it for themselves, the food. Millions of people died because the food was seized, and a lot of it was left to rot even. Okay, so they seized it from the farmers, they kept it for the wealthy elite, and a lot of it was like rotting, because centralized planning is always stupid, always inefficient, and always fatal. They tried to redistribute this food, it didn't work. So Vladimir Lenin's successors, including Joseph Stalin, expanded the killing machine. Okay, so it didn't stop with Vladimir. It continued with Joseph Stalin. Entire classes of people were exterminated. The Ukrainian Holodomor, which is a famine, murdered alone. Like this famine murdered millions. Okay, Stalin, after Vladimir was there, Vladimir Lenin, he filled gulags with political prisoners for committing crimes like criticizing the government, owning too much bread, and not forking that over to the government to redistribute. You couldn't own your own bread. Okay. Having the wrong facial expressions during a parade. No, quite literally, that happened. If I have time, I might revisit that. But Stalin threw people into the gulags for crazy things. There was a victory parade. I'll hit on this a little bit. But the people were smiling during this victory parade, and I guess he took them and threw them into the gulags. Very, very creepy and sad. But the Bolshevik experiment didn't stop with Vladimir Lenin. A lot of people think that it was just a continuation, and Joseph Stalin kind of took it over. And it was born out of Karl Marx's theories. Okay, the nightmare that devoured his own children, by the way, they died. Then you see it completely destroy Russia through the Bolsheviks experiment. So the regime insisted that the suffering was necessary. Okay, so there was tons of suffering at the time, and they insisted that this was a step towards the road to utopia. When Lenin led the Bolsheviks in 1917 in the Bolshevik Revolution, he used Karl Marx's writings as a blueprint. Okay, Lenin didn't see Marx as a philosopher, he saw him as a prophet, and this was a religion. Okay, and he was a zealot, and he intended to fulfill prophecy, even if he had to drown Russia in blood to do it. Okay, and these were people who believed, the Bolsheviks believed, that the ends justified the means. Or and, this pattern started to repeat globally. We saw it in Russia, we saw it in China, we saw it in Cuba, North Korea, Cambodia, Vietnam, Eastern Europe. Okay, everywhere communism took root, the same events unfolded like a tragic script. And we're back. Thanks so much for tuning in. I so do appreciate you being here. Subscribe to the channel. This is the second part of our Karl Marx episode. Now, I wanted to take a quick break, but before I took the break, I was telling you a little bit about communism taking root, and it is the same tragic script over and over and over again. So what they do first, they confiscate the land. They seize private property. They abolish the free markets. One-party rule is installed. And this is the difference between Marxism and communism. Communism is the political machine that helps manifest this ideology into a reality. Censorship, secret police, political prisons, forced labor, mass starvation, executions, elimination of religion, destruction of families, and the worship of the state. So communism, a lot of leftists will say communism didn't or failed to live up to Karl Marx's ideology. And that's why people will say I'm a Marxist, not a communist. And I just want to be clear here on the Conservative Cat Show. Subscribe. Communism was Marxism in action. Okay. Marx demanded a utopia. Reality requires authoritarianism. And it's just this flawed belief, really, that human beings are inherently going to do the right thing, the good thing. We are sinful by nature. The Bible teaches that. The Christian faith teaches that we are inherently sinful, and we are saved by grace through the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. But we are inherently sinful. Take a look at a newborn baby. Comes out screaming and wanting food, gluttonous. The baby will not stop eating until it is completely full. Starts screaming, and it's all about me, I. Okay. Human beings are like that. And Marxist ideology, Karl Marx, he demanded this utopia, but the reality is authoritarianism, and you can't get away from that. So communist leaders were left with two options. Admit Karl Marx was wrong, or force the world to obey them. They were already deep into this thing, and just keep going. And no matter the ends justify the means, right? And every communist leader has chosen force in history. Okay, Stalin, Joseph Stalin, which was just a continuation of the Bolsheviks as we went through. He starved millions in Ukraine. Mao, he exterminated landlords and shot entire families in village squares. Pol Pot executed anyone who wore glasses. No, quite literally, because glasses meant you were reading, and you can't have people reading because people who are reading are a threat. So he executed people who had reading glasses. And this is not the accidental result of Marxism, and leftists will tell you that, those instances weren't actual communism. Or it wasn't actual Marxism manifested, and that communism got Marxism wrong. No, Marxism, this was the direct result of Marxism, communism, Mao, Stalin, Pol Pot. So when you start with a belief that people are not individuals, okay, but rather economic units, when you believe family is an obstacle, when you believe religion is a poison, when you believe private property is evil, when you believe the state is God, when you believe utopia requires revolution, what do you expect except destruction? Okay. So communism was the manifestation of this Marxist ideology, and historians, they have estimated the death toll here of communist regimes conservatively at about 100 million people. And many people believe that that number is much higher, 150 million, even more than that. Let me give you a sense of scale here. That is the entire population of Florida. Poof, gone. Pennsylvania, Ohio, erased. Imagine every seat filled in an NFL stadium 13,000 times over, just with dead people, okay? A stadium filled 1,300 times filled, and those are all just dead people. Imagine that. Imagine 100 million individual stories cut short because one guy believed that the world needed to be rebuilt according to his bitterness. He was angry at the world because he sucked at life. That's it. And every time, without fail, communist leaders said the same thing. This is necessary for the greater good. And that's the dangerous thing about collectivism. Once the group becomes more important than the individual becomes disposable. And you cannot have a peaceful system that begins declaring that some lives have to be sacrificed for equality. Okay, you cannot have a peaceful system that starts out that way. Okay, Marxism fails everywhere because Marxism is terrible. I mean, Marxism fails everywhere because Marxism misunderstands people and how people are inherently evil. Marx thought you could rearrange society like furniture. Move a class there, move this class here, move that class there, and everything would be perfect, and it would be a nice little utopia. But humans aren't furniture. You can't move them around. They are flawed, they are fallen, they are complicated, they are selfish, passionate, and sometimes irrational beings because of the original sin. Right? Christianity teaches us this. Marx believed people would work hard, even though, there were people worked even harder and earned, the same reward, but they'd still continue to work hard, even if they earned the same reward as everybody else who wasn't working as hard. Okay, history has proved the opposite. History has shown that people hoard resources. They hid, they resented, they rebelled. Marxism, Karl Marx believed the state would be perfect once capitalism was gone, and that the government would be, nice when the government was gone. And that's just not true. History shows us that the state becomes a monster, okay, once capitalism is gone. Karl Marx believed that religion was a barrier to progress. History shows that without God, moral rot spreads like wildfire. Look at his own life, right? Karl Marx believed families were obstacles. History shows us without families, societies begin to collapse. Karl Marx, he believed that people would govern themselves. But history shows us tyrants actually fill those vacuums And in the end, Marxism collapses for one simple reason. It tries to create heaven on earth without God. And it ends up creating something very close to hell. Okay, so now you might say, well, Kat, that was the 20th century. Surely all that's in the past and perhaps it could work now. No, Marx didn't die with the Soviet Union. He simply changed costumes. Today, Marxism hides in words like equity, social justice, collective liberation, anti-racism, redistribution, workers' rights, wealth taxes, abolish the police, reimagine safety, eat the rich. Okay, Marxism still exists today. They just kind of dress it up in these kind of fancy words that we don't really recognize. And it hides in college classrooms where Marxist professors, self-proclaimed Marxist professors, teach our young children and students that America is nothing but an oppressed in red, white, and blue. And it hides in activist groups. Okay, they're in our college campuses. This ideology, it hides in these activist groups that promotes class conflict. It hides in these movements that demand collectivist control over healthcare, energy, housing, education, and speech itself. It hides behind every idea that the government is the solution to the problem. So Karl Marx is not gone. He's gone digital. He's not gone. He's gone digital. And he's on TikTok with this, ring light with an influencer, a TikTok influencer who thinks that he's all that in a bag of chips, and who's promoting Marxism with the fancy language of equity and workers' rights. He's in the university syllabi and the HR training manuals. Karl Marx is in political speeches disguised as compassion. But the core is the same. Destroy the old world, create a new one, silence critics, and let the state stand in the place of God. That is the heart of Marxism right there. The heart of Marxism is the belief that humans are perfectible through force. That is what Marxism is. We are not perfect human beings, and we will never be perfect no matter how much force you put behind it. The heart of Christianity is the belief that humans are redeemable through grace. Marx believed in remaking society. Christ believes in remaking souls at an individual level. And once you remake souls, then society gets better. Right? It is the antithesis to Christianity. This guy hated religion, Karl Marx. He believed that future was created through rebellion and violence. He actually called for revolution. Christ believes that the future is created through repentance at an individual level. The sanctification process happens. Then our families are sanctified. Then our societies are sanctified. That is what it's from an individual choice, and it grows and it creates a better society. Karl Marx thinks that the collectivists, the collectivism in the society can force people to change at an individual level. And that's just not, it's not human nature. Okay, so Marxism says you are just a class statistic, that you are an economic unit. Christianity says you are knit together in your mother's womb, and God knows you before you were knit together in your mother's womb. Marxism says family must be weakened because family competes with your allegiance to the state. Christianity says family is holy. Marxism says private property is evil. Christianity says stewardship is righteous, and leaving an inheritance to your children is important. Not important, but also your obligation. Hold on, I've got the scripture here. Here it is. Okay. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. This is the importance of a legacy for future generations. Karl Marx did not believe in that. It is the opposite of Christianity in that sense. Marxism promises heaven but delivers tyranny. Christianity promises truth and delivers freedom. Marxism and Christianity cannot peacefully coexist. One must destroy the other. And Karl Marx, he died In 1883, he was buried in London, broke, bitter, still convinced that he was right, but he never saw his own ideas put into practice. He never witnessed the gulags, he never witnessed the mass starvation, the executions, the mass graves, and he never saw the pain communism caused and the death toll. He never saw the haunted eyes of survivors. But we have. You and I have. And we have seen nations fall. We have seen freedom crushed. We have seen churches burned. We have seen children starve in the name of equality. We have seen truth twisted into propaganda. And we have seen this ideology rising up. It's just dressed a little bit different. But it's driven by that same resentment and hatred really towards Christianity and the Christian belief that you can change at an individual level, and that change is instrumental in fixing society and nations. So the lesson of Karl Marx is simple. Ideas matter. Bad ideas can kill people. And the only defense against this ideological tyranny is the truth, and God's truth, the historical truth, the moral truth. And as long as we stand on truth, Marxism can roar all its want, roar and rear its ugly head, but it will never conquer. So thank you for joining me today on the Conservative Cat Show. We did do a big old deep dive here into history, ideology, the dangers that still shape our world. And I want you to stay alert, stay bold, stay grounded in faith, and above all, stay free. Karl Marx, not a great guy. He wasn't a great father, husband. But above all, he never saw the manifestation of his own ideology, which was super dangerous. We did, though. And I took you through the Bolsheviks and Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot, how they killed hundreds of millions of people through communism, which is the manifestation of Marxism ideology. You guys have blessed